Started right now. Hello there, folks. My name is Jay Frost, and if you're new to this party, welcome. Hope you brought some party favors with you because we're going to have a good time. We are closing out the year, really. I know it's only November, but with a lot of programs in the Philanthropy Mastermind series, which I'm privileged to serve as host of on behalf of DonorSearch, a company that if you don't know, you can learn more about at donorsearch.net. And just in brief, they will help you know more about your donors. And if it weren't for them, none of us would be in this world of philanthropy. So I hope you'll check them out there. And when you do, you'll see the entire calendar of programs that they allow us to do here, inviting the real leaders of our field from throughout the world to talk about fundraising and philanthropy in all its facets. And so that calendar will be over there under the resources tab, once again at donorsearch.net. You won't be hearing much about DonorSearch for the rest of the program, so I do urge you to check them out. They're really a wonderful company, as well as so supportive of education for all of us in this field who are trying to do better and better, both on the long-term things and the topical. And if there was ever something that blended those two, it's the subject today, where we have the great fortune of having, for the second time this week, but also multiple times in this series, the great Randall Hallett, who's sitting there patiently as I rattle on here. And Randall will be talking with us today, of course, about planned giving in a down market. Now, that might seem like a funny title, considering that the market, I think, went up by 900 points today. But if you look at this,
Timing's everything, Jay. Timing's
timing is
everything.
if you look at this with anything longer than a day lens, you know exactly where the market is. And it affects so many of us in so many ways that I'm so glad we're going to have this presentation today. And the presentation isn't complete without you. So there are two ways that you can participate today. One is the chat at the bottom of your screen, and already Deb warmed that up for us. Thank you, Deb. Please do go ahead and just say that you're here. Let us know that you're with us. Let us know maybe which organization you're from. Feel free to start warming up the chat. It's a great way for our presenter, for Randall, to know that you're here. He'd really appreciate knowing that. Thank you, Sue. Please, everybody, just go in there and say howdy. And then also, if you have questions, I want to urge you to use the question and answer, the Q&A at the bottom of your screen throughout. Go ahead and list those questions, including questions that you might have right now, because so much is happening in this volatile market that Randall will be talking about, but there may be questions that he didn't cover as he prepared. And if there's anybody in this field who is prepared to take a question on the fly, it is Randall Hallett. So with that, I'll just give you the briefest of introductions and then let him get underway. Randall, of course, is the founder and CEO of Hallett Philanthropy. If you're not familiar with this firm, I want to go and urge you to go and take a look and to follow him in every way you can. He's a great force in our field, both as a practitioner, advisor, and also as an educator, as you'll learn today if this is your first time. He was formerly president and principal consultant at Goebel Group and a chief development officer at several institutions, most recently the Nebraska Medical Center. He has multiple degrees in subjects that relate to everything we do, and particularly this subject. So I won't go over his whole educational profile, but instead I'll do what I don't normally do, and that is to look him up on LinkedIn. And if he's kind enough to connect there, I think you'll find him a good friend in this field. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton with pleasure to the great Randall Hallett. Randall?
Well, I agree with 2/3 of the great Randall Hallett. Randall Hallett, yes, the great is highly questionable. Good afternoon, or if you're, I guess, listening from west of the West Coast, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to talk about planned giving in our world today. And as Jay mentioned, it is an interesting time to be talking about it, considering we are trying to figure out what's going on in the world of the markets, and they're up and they're down and all over the place. And my goal today at the end is to really maybe give you some tools to leverage planned giving opportunities in this crazy time. I appreciate Jay's introduction. One thing that I am very proud of, I am a tax lawyer by educational training. So I spent my career doing lots of different philanthropy, but the things I had most fun with were complicated estates and working here in Nebraska, taking cattle and farmland and grain, portions of grain and bargain sales and all kinds of other things that sometimes get missed in terms of opportunities for planned giving. Today, we're going to highlight a couple of off the books kind of interesting things that might be worthy of your thoughts and time. Health philanthropy, I do a lot of different things. Really, any success I have belongs to the client. They're the ones who go out and ask and do the work. But I'm glad to partner with a lot of different organizations, healthcare, higher ed, and others that allow me the chance to teach and to be a part of what their success is. And at the end of the day, it is their success. Jay also mentioned about education. I don't do this to necessarily promote myself. I do a podcast every week, 20 minutes. And I advocate it because I'm a lifelong learner. I got a lot of education, and I believe that we have a responsibility to always be improving in what we do and how we do it. So I would encourage you to find ways to better yourself. This is one way. This isn't an advertisement. I pick a subject. I talk about the challenge in that subject. Maybe there's some literature, maybe there's some research on it real quickly. And then I jump into the conversation around what can you do tactically to improve or to have some thoughts about how you might be able to deal with the challenge. And it's 20 minutes. You can listen to it on your way home, listen to it on the way to work. And if you're crazy enough, it's on YouTube. You can download it on any of the platforms and watch me on YouTube. I don't know why anybody recommended that would be a good idea, but it's a good way. And if you don't like my podcast, I'm okay with that. I don't know how many people listen. Go find something that challenges you to get better, that allows you to grow, and you'll do better work. The same is true of writing. I write a lot, extensively. 2 blogs a week is just one example. Another place, RSS feed, you can get that. What are we going to be talking about today? Well, we're going to talk about the why. And if you were with us on Tuesday, I'm going to cover about 5 similar slides, and everything else is different. But to set this up as to why planned giving is really important right now, even though the markets have been down. Number 2 is to talk about some of the basics and what we're dealing with. 3, the why me. Maybe you're not a planned giving expert. Maybe you're a gift officer, an annual giving officer. We all have a responsibility to be talking about legacy opportunities. And I'm going to kind of position this to make this everybody's job in the nonprofit sector, to be aware of and engaged with planned giving opportunities. The kind of the life goes on, what to do. We have to understand that even though the world is a little chaotic, we're post-pandemic, certainly economic, we've got an election that just occurred, life still occurs, and we're going to talk about that. And lastly, kind of the details. What works when you're kind of have some challenges in the marketplace that are some things we don't necessarily know or experienced in the past. So let me start with the why, and this was something we discussed. It's not been since the 1970s that we've had 2 what you might think of as independent macroeconomic issues colliding at the same time. We have inflation, obviously, and the numbers came out today. They're down a little bit, but it's still kind of staggering. And at the same time, we have a market, I guess before today, that was down a bunch. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, was down 29,000. And if we use the Dow Jones as a benchmark, we have these 2 competing issues. And the problem is that the work that goes on behind the scenes by economic leaders to cover one is going to affect the other, probably in a negative way. And so what we're going to have to do is figure out where we're at. And there's no easy answer. But at the end of the day, our job is to build relationships and help hopefully drive philanthropic support to the missions and the nonprofits that we work with and for. So it's probably beneficial for us to understand that both are occurring and what our families are going through. And this is kind of a repeat from Tuesday for about 2 minutes, but it gives us context as to why we have to change maybe the way we're thinking about this. So this is your family that maybe you're considering, and I saw someone from a radio station. I've seen a couple of people here from different places in education. Here's arts and entertainment. This is a perfect major gift opportunity family. 500,000, you can see various, different iterations of that family, different places in life. And here's the world they're living in. If they're making 500,000, we can just kind of say maybe generically that they're paying taxes across the board of about 150,000, which leaves $350,000 of income that they can use. So you're talking somewhere about $30,000 a month. That's a lot of money. Maybe not as much in California as it is in Nebraska, but it's still a lot of money. And we assume that 90% of those dollars are probably in some way, shape, or form going to be spent in what I call hard and discretionary income. Hard expenses are things like mortgage and house and cars and things that are required payments. I would also throw in things like kids' education. You're going to spend some of that. And generally my experience is they spend about 50% of it on hard expenses. And that leaves discretionary like trips and, a third car or the second home or things of that nature. And then that's when they make their charitable gift. It's in that discretionary area. And if they give 15% of that, they're giving about $46,000 to charity, to nonprofits. And that's wonderful. But when you start pushing inflation, you start to see changes in their world. If you have the same financial inputs, meaning $500,000 in income, then all of a sudden you start adding 10%. Another way to look at it is that you have 10% less in these categories. And all of a sudden they have less money coming home, meaning to be spent. But the hard expenses stay the same. Mortgage payment didn't change. The car payments didn't change. The kids' education expenses didn't change. But there's less discretionary income. And now the question becomes what goes? And what I can promise you is not going to go first is the country club, vacation, and other things. Even though they are discretionary, they're part of a social makeup of that person. And as a result, charity starts falling down the priority list and there's less dollars. And when you incorporate this over lots of people, less people giving. If you follow any of the Giving USA numbers, which I don't even go into here, we know that less people are making gifts. We're below 50% of the households in the United States are making charitable gifts. So the competition's tight and then inflation makes it tighter. And then this guy speaks, Jerome Powell, the chair of the Fed. And that leads to sometimes, particularly recently when he speaks, chaos in the markets. And that leads to people getting even more conservative. And we end up in a scenario where people start spending even less. They get concerned. And this is what's beginning to happen now with the push of higher inflationary rates as we're having retrenchment in spending. And people then begin to get really concerned and they do something then more even dramatic. The same scenario, and you add inflation and a down market, troubled economic times, they begin to save even more money. The rainy day fund grows. And what ends up happening is charity is at the very bottom. The competition for nonprofit dollars, when we look at someone's income, is more challenging today than it's been. I would go back maybe to the Great Recession, but I would even challenge us to go back into the 1970s when we actually had real inflation like what we're seeing today. And this gets into the conversation of why we're headed into planned gifts. Income dollars versus asset allocation. We're going to talk about numbers and how people's portfolios have grown in the last 20 years. Just to give you context, the total dollars that are coming over the next 20 years that will be passed from one generation to the next is somewhere, depending on the market, the day, and the analyst, $40 to $50 trillion in the next 20 to 30 years. And yet we have CFOs and finance committees who are really pushing on all of us to get more cash. And I'm all for that. But it can't be at the expense of what the biggest opportunity we have in the nonprofit world. Because only 3 places planned gifts or estate gifts can go, or estates can go in general. They can go pay taxes. And I don't know anybody that says, woo, I cannot wait for the IRS to get my money when I'm gone. It can go to individuals. I've had the privilege of working with incredibly wealthy people. And there's one consistent theme amongst all of them. They aren't going to leave it all to their kids. They're just not. They're going to leave it, some for their kids, but they want their kids to go do something productive in life. The third place is us, nonprofits, charity. You can't burn it. It's illegal. Can't be buried with it. It's illegal. You only have 3 options. And we know people don't want to give it to the government. And we know people, particularly with means, aren't going to leave every penny to their kids, which means it leaves us. The problem is that we need, in an asset allocation opportunity, a sense of delayed gratification, because it doesn't happen tomorrow. So we have to be and prepare our organization for the bigger picture. I want to take just 2 slides to talk about what plan giving information we know. And this comes from attributed sources. You'll see them on the bottom right, because I think that's important. But what we know is that the data around wealthy people and how they look at their philanthropy, particularly when it comes out of estates from the IRS and from Giving USA, is that we can begin to figure out who are the most likely people to be our best gift opportunities. And 20 years ago, we knew that probably the most likely people are the ones who make the most consistent gifts. And that's shifting a little bit. I still think that has incredible validity. Those that are your most consistent givers every month, quarter, year, are the most likely people. But what we also know is that fewer people are making a bigger difference. And so all of a sudden, we're going to have to figure it out who those people are. And while Jay mentioned at the top, we're not going to talk about DonorSearch. This is my company of choice in terms of research and data, in part because Bill did a fantastic job of acquiring immense amounts of data points that other places don't have, like charitable giving. But the other thing is that they're creative. And I would defer to my dear friend, Nathan Chappell, and their DonorSearch AI product that allows us to start looking at inclination, likelihood in this process. And I'll put in a plug for my friend. If you, and I don't have a picture of it this time, but if you're looking for a book to read, next week on the 15th on National Philanthropy Day will be the release of a book called The Generosity Crisis by Nathan Chappell, Brian Crimmins, and Michael Ashley. I would highly, highly, highly recommend you go get it. The Generosity Crisis. In fact, it was reviewed today in the Nonprofit Times and received the highest review you can get from one of our industry leaders, the editor and publisher of the Nonprofit Times. This book is going to change the way we look at our relationships. And so I would encourage you to get your copy and take it home and spend some time reading about it, maybe a little bit over at the Thanksgiving break. We also know from Stelter in Des Moines that those that make gifts and put them in their estates, average starting point, probably about 53. Some might argue it's before that, but is once you're in, you're in. And so those relationship pieces are critically important. This is transformational giving, not transactional. And that's important to note. Why you? Or if you're a planned giving officer or expert, maybe we turn this to why someone else. So I think there's an old school, new school perspective in all of this. And I've battled this for 25 plus years, in that what normally I think people view in terms of philanthropy, in terms of gift getting, gift connections, is this. We got major gifts over here, and we got planned gifts over here, and there's this wall in between them. And I've always advocated this is a very poor way to look at what we do in the relationship business. If we're truly in the relationship business and we're the conduit to our organization to particular people, then what we need to realize is that this wall causes problems. I much rather look at it this way, that these major gifts we are looking at include things like cash gifts, pledged gifts, campaign gifts, and yes, planned gifts. If we're really going to look at the generosity crisis and this idea, what Nathan and Brian Crimmins in particular talk about, a radical connection that we need with our community, in particular with those that are making a difference, then we need to look at it like this. And that as we move donors up the hierarchy, which you are all familiar with, there's a different way of looking at it, The consistency in all of this is the major gift officer. It's all of our responsibilities to be engaged with planned giving. You don't have to be the expert. No one's going to ask you to draft a trust or come up with a bequest out of nowhere, out of thin air. But you're the reason they trust the organization. You're the connection for what we do is in terms of our mission and our outreach and our productivity and our results. You're the reason that they communicate with us if you're a gift officer. And what I find most often and frustrating is gift officers saying, well, but I don't do planned giving. I'm like, no one's asking you to be an attorney, but this is a relationship issue. So the new school variety for me is that going back here, we're all in this business. The question is how we communicate it, how we look at it, and things of that nature. And that leads me into this idea of what do we do? So many of you might think of planned giving, if you're not an expert, just like this. It's like this big shadow monster. And I think there's a much better way of looking at it. And yes, I'm going to say, you've got a friend in PG. You've got a friend in PG. Planned giving should be part of your arsenal and opportunity. It shouldn't be scared of it. It's actually pretty easy. It's allowing people to know that they have an opportunity when they pass, or if we think about annuities and other things like that, but the gift would be realized probably post-death, to make a gift that's going to change lives in a mission and something that they're passionate about. If you can just do that, then what we have is planned giving conversations more consistently, constantly, all the time. And that's really what we need. It doesn't replace cash pledged or campaign giving. It augments them. It gives people further opportunity to invest, to believe, and to make a difference. And you might be thinking, well, planned giving usually is more of an asset allocation or something of the estate. Gosh, the market's been all over the place. I'm not sure this is the right time. I believe context matters. So I want to pull just a couple of examples of stocks over the past, let's say 14, 15 years, okay? I just pulled them randomly here, I think last week. If you bought Coca-Cola, $100,000 worth of Coca-Cola in 2008, that'd have been $21 a share to giving you 46,000 shares or 4,600 shares. Today, with no other investment, that same $100,000 is worth more than 2.5 times. If you were smart enough to buy Apple in the in the early part of this century, 2008, it would be worth 4,000 times more in those 14 years. Walmart. Look at Walmart, steadfast growth, not a crazy stock. It'd be up 259% if you didn't buy anything else. If you're an indexed fund person, meaning you buy basically indexes, and let's say you follow the Dow Jones or the Schwab Index 1000, you would invest dollars, let's say $100,000 back in the Dow Jones. At a certain point, it was 12,000. I didn't even take it down to the 6,000 that it got to in the beginning part of 2000, late 2008, early 2009, more 2008. So I elevated it. The Dow, if you just put $100,000 and indexed it against the Dow Jones, you'd be at almost 300,000. And if you did it against the Schwab Index, the top 1,000 corporations that Schwab follows, you'd have 3.5 times your money. The point is that people have made money. There's a reason there's $40 to $50 trillion it's going to pass. So if you're thinking, well, the market's been down, okay, it was at 36,000, then it dropped to 29. Now it's up to, I don't know what it is for this moment, 33 or something. The point is context matters. Context would tell you people generally have been investing, particularly if they're 60, 70, 80 years old, for a lot longer than the last 15 minutes. And even if the stock market were to drop to 28,000, there'd be still people making money. Your responsibility is to help train yourself. And if you're the planned giving person, help the other fundraisers, philanthropic officers, train them in this, that nothing replaces self-learning and just doing it. Asking questions about, gosh, what is it you want to do with your estate? I love the question. I don't even get into it here in detail, and it's something I teach, but I always position it as, and it was really true, and I think it's probably a little less true today than it used to be. I was always fascinated with people with money because they had a plan, most of them. And I'd ask them, look, you've done very well. I'm trying to figure out my own life. I've got a wife and children. How would you handle your planning? You'd be surprised at what they would tell you. I was always amazed. I would do that for self-learning purposes and then end up learning everything about their financial future, what their plans were, what their dreams were. I'd get more than the kids would get sometimes because I became trusted. Back to that relationship. Yes, I had unique talent and skill set and education when it comes to planned giving instruments. That had nothing to do with the relationship. That has to do with technical skills that I happen to have. They're not relevant to the relationship building process. Planned giving is also about face-to-face. It's very personal. You can see it's also, you can't be aggressive. The more you push, the more they retrench. Kind of reminds me of my parents. Mom and dad, or dad's 80, just short of 80, mom's 78. They live about 6 blocks from me. Very blessed to have them a part of my life on a, almost a daily basis, certainly with our kids, seeing them and interact with their grandchildren. But if I push my parents too much on certain things, they buckle a little bit. They're hesitant. Like, oh, here comes my kid. He's going to take the keys to the car and, take, the checkbook away. I've learned that sometimes it's easier just to ask a few questions. How you guys doing? Everybody okay? Anything I can do to help? Do you have any challenges? And that legitimacy of the softness of the inquiry, which is true, I'm interested in all of those, opens the door to other things that may be a little more complicated. I think it's applicable in the way we talk about planned giving with people who this is a tougher subject for. Start with the idea of what a commitment might be. Start with the concept of, do you know what you want to do? Have you thought about it? Start generic. And then build into that down the road, this might be something to talk about. I would also argue, if you are not a planned giving expert, which means you should be doing this, that you can break the glass in a case of emergency. There are people like me, there are people in your organization, there are people on your board, there are people in the community that can be that expert. You don't have to be the expert to do this well. What you have to do is be a good listener, legitimate in your desire to help someone. And at the end of the day, wanting them to help them, engage them in making a difference. The last thing I'll leave you as we begin to move into some of the technical things is that it's always about legacy. And legacy doesn't mean name and lights. Legacy means, what is it you want when you're not here anymore for there to be impact on? If you ask me what I want my legacy to be, first and foremost, it is based on being a good son, a good brother, a good husband, and a good dad. And hopefully a good person and a good friend. But if you get into the monetary, yeah, there's some things I think could be better and I believe in, and I've spent my life helping, and yes. And even though I have a 9 and a 6-year-old, planned giving is a part of my existence, because the worst case scenario, knock on wood, it doesn't happen, is all 4 of us, my family, are all together when we pass. What's going to happen to those dollars? I want a say in that. And so it's not about the death, it's about the legacy. What do you want to have happen? How do we ensure what you believe in's around for the next generation, not after their death? Don't bring that up. For the next generation or for the next group of people that need assistance. Have you thought about your legacy? What kind of legacy do you picture for yourself? You'd be surprised at what people will tell you. I think the other thing is to realize there are moments in people's lives where we know that this kind of thought process is occurring. And by the way, this is bear market, this is bull market. What we know is, and this is from Dr. Russell James, who's at Texas A&M, does a fabulous job on planned giving work. And so I want to give him proper credit. These are the top 10 factors where charitable additions in estate plans occur. And about 60% of my business or so is in healthcare. I'd use this because what we know is that 7 out of the 10 are health related. Some are negative, some are positive. But if you know your donors well enough and you know that they have health challenges, they're thinking about estate plans from their own situation, a loved one situation, or the birth of a new generation. In the same regard, we also know what are the top 10 factors of when estates are removed, or charities are removed from one's estate. And lo and behold, again, 8 of the 10 are health related. So if you're wondering as a gift officer, what would be some of the triggers that might allow you to have important conversations? I just told you they're health related. People start questioning things. So you have now tools at your disposal to know when to have these conversations or to ask questions or more likely to ask them. We're in a bear market. We're coming out of a pandemic. We just got done with an election. The world's a little crazy. It just is. Life still's happening. All of these things are occurring every single day in our lives and in the lives of the people we love and in the lives of the people that we build relationships with as donors and supporters of our organization. Why I'm telling you this is if you think that the bear market actually affects people's decision making, it may impact how they do something. It won't impact whether they do something because these things are still occurring. Life's still moving along. And now is our opportunity to figure out how to work with individuals to make it possible. Which brings us to our most technical pieces. What are the kinds of instruments that work in a bear market? What are some of the things that we can do to help people overcome their concerns? So bear market means the market's down by a certain percentage over a period of time. And a bull market is when it's going up. And we were in this incredible bull market, ironically, in the middle of the pandemic. So the first tactic is if you're not talking about blended gifts every single day, you are leaving opportunity on the table. And I mean this sincerely, shame on you. Every gift should be a blended gift conversation. We talked about in the inflationary times about more cash gifts that we can use certain strategies to include estates for people who are having trouble meeting pledges. In this case, it's just the other side is maybe they've got a cash gift and you say, gosh, have you thought about how you might tie that to an estate gift? Maybe they want to endow their annual fund gift. Maybe they want to find a way in which they can support the organization in some type of endowment. If you're not talking about blended gifts, almost with every major gift, at least as an option, bringing it up, you're shorting the opportunity. And frankly, you're not allowing the donor the opportunity to make the transformational difference. The book that I mentioned, Nathan Chappell and Brian Crimmins, A Radical Connection to You and to Your Organization. that becomes transformational in the way they feel about you and what you're trying to accomplish. What we know is that every gift should be in some way, shape, or form blended. I'll even give you some language. We have a number of donors in your situation who are wondering and looking at us, and they're beginning to think about their estate and how it might benefit the same passion you have in your cash giving. Have you ever considered how we could make your dreams come true? By the way, we'll make sure get this to Jay and then to DonorSearch, or email me. We'll show you the email at the end. I'll email it to you. Use this as to your advantage. The second is a bequest or allocation from a trust. Is a simple bequest, but there's a different way of looking at it. Most of the time we think about bequests as specific, meaning we identify something in, let's say, a will or a trust, and that's what we're going to give or leave to someone. What I'd advise during bear markets is actually more of a percentage approach, almost like a residuary, that you establish. If you're having conversations, someone's like, well, I'm not quite sure because I have all this, this, and this, and you say, well, maybe there's a different way of looking at it. Instead of worrying about the house or the cars or a specific stock, could we be the beneficiaries of 10%? Because if you do the percentage, then the amount doesn't matter as much, or the specific items don't matter as much. And that allows people more creativity to think about how they can maximize their charitable giving. So instead of worrying about the specific, go by the percentage. I think what you'll find are people are, because then it's stocks at, if they, let's say 5 million today, 10 million tomorrow, 4 million in 4 weeks, it's still 10%. And that could be a really big gift for you. Tactic number 3, annuities. You might think, are you insane? Look at inflation, and we're seeing, particularly like in CDs and things are finally, my gosh, you finally can make a return on a CD. I can't tell you how many people are having concerns about, particularly after the age of about 60 or 65, of what their life's going to look like from a cash flow perspective. I'll give you 2 stories. Number one, I was recently meeting with my investment broker. I said, what's the, and we went to grade school together, so I've known him literally 50 years. And he says, I said, what's going on? And he says, gosh, I had this weird meeting today. I said, what happened? He says, this 87-year-old woman came in and she's terrified of the markets. And she wants to move all of it into some type of series of vehicles where she's guaranteed income. I said, did you think about a charitable annuity or remainder trust? And he just looked at me and he says, no. And I said, are they philanthropic? Do they have desires of how an organization who's a nonprofit is important to them? He goes, we didn't even talk about it. One story. Another one. Recently, a client asked me to help them make a physical ask, large gift for the organization, largest in their history. And when we got into the conversation with the actual donor, and I was kind of leading that discussion, I began to figure out he was concerned about it, and he's in finance. And I started bringing up the idea of a series of annuities that would guarantee him income as a portion of that, 8-figure gift. And financial guy, he was like, I don't know anything about annuities. When I kind of walked him through the tax deduction on the front side, and part of it would be tax-free as payments coming out either quarterly, semi-annually, or annually, and that he would get a charitable intent of being met, and it would be a portion of the overall gift. He was just floored. And he says, well, that would take care of my problem about worrying about income because I'm not leaving any to my kids. I just got to make sure I'm okay. In uncertain times, people begin to look for certainty. And particularly if they don't have income streams like jobs or maybe rental property, they're living on that in, their personal endowment, those assets. Sometimes an annuity and a guaranteed income can make them feel much better to ensure they have the kind of life that they want. So put that back into your arsenal. The idea of guaranteed payments makes people feel better. I remember my father, when he retired, told me about, and mom and dad did very well, But they were concerned because he goes, well, there is no more checks. And I think that's a natural feeling for people who are concerned about what their daily life looks like. Tactic number 4, and somehow I missed that, I apologize, is the idea of a closely held business. Particularly inside a charitable remainder trust, people are still making decisions about their business, and they sometimes struggle to find a way to pass it on to the family or to another person. And charitable remainder trust, and this is why it's part of number 3, that's why I apologize, is it allows small businesses to utilize a charitable trust for the purposes of a family buyback with charitable intent or various other options. So as you have small business owners like myself, they're trying to figure out, what am I going to do with X, Y, and Z? And that can become kind of a challenge. Tactic, minimum distributions. Just because we have a bear market doesn't change the fact that the federal government requires those with larger retirement assets to take minimum required distributions. RMDs, they're still there. Now, we did have a change here recently with tax code that it's gone to a permanence, and they're looking, I think it's going to actually go up to 75 at some point. But there's estimated billions of dollars annually that's coming out of these RMDs, and many people don't want them because they cause tax problems. Bear markets don't affect that. Now, there may be some who say, I don't have as much that I'm being forced to give. But if you have assets and they're in a qualified account, you're required to take them at age 72 now. There may be a little less based on the markets, but at the end of the day, the process hasn't changed. Another great way of someone making a charitable gift. And just because the market's down doesn't change this opportunity. Another tactic, which I think is actually number 5, is beneficiaries of insurance policies. And the reason I like these in a bear market is they're not dependent on the markets themselves. So it might be a term life, which is a little more challenging because obviously there's an end point. But I'm seeing more and more people, particularly those with wealth, use a certain kind of whole life policy, and they overfund it beyond what the premium would be as an investment tool. And if invested correctly, you actually are setting up what would be considered the same as a Roth 401k. It's because at some point, if overfunded, that money can come out tax-free as a payment back to the people who, if done correctly, put the payments in, a couple or an individual. Here's why this is important. They're overfunding it because they want to use it as a retirement vehicle, but yet it still holds the insurance ability to pay out if someone dies. And so what you end up with are 2 benefits, potentially. And if someone's old enough or older where they don't need that insurance benefit to protect their family, kids, wife, husband, whatever, what a great vehicle to be considered as an asset that might be distributed to a nonprofit charity. It's a tax avoidance process that allows people to fund additional money beyond what you would think of as a Roth 401k or Roth IRA. Just something to keep aware of. And I'm seeing more and more of this, and it's not dependent on the market because they're going to fund it because they're trying to get money out of their life and into a retirement vehicle that is allowed to grow and be distributed later on in life tax-free. So it's a little bit of something to consider in that process. Don't forget, you can do that as a percentage as well. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. Could we do 10%, 20%? My favorite life insurance situation from a planned giving perspective was when I was younger in my career and a lot less gray hair. And it was at a military school that I had the privilege of overseeing their philanthropy. And at the time that we had it was a military school going back 125 years. So most of the people in World War II, having graduated somewhere, between 1935 and certainly 1941, and then up through, the Korean War and then into Vietnam, Many of them had gone into the military, particularly in World War II. They all did. And what wasn't known is that the government provides an automatic $10,000 life insurance policy for those who are serving in combat situations. And those are lifetime benefits, particularly for those in the World War II generation. Well, I figured this out and I started going around saying, hey, how many of you have a life insurance policy because you served in the military in World War II? This would be, these people are 70, 80 years old. And every time we would do an alumni event, it was another about 25 hands. I said, do you consider that giving to the academy? They weren't going to use it. They knew that, but they didn't know what to do with it. Quick, easy, down, dirty, instant revenue streams over time that are still happening at St. Thomas Academy. So there are a lot of different ways to look at insurance from a plan giving perspective. In the end, even though the bear market, and we talked about some tactics, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Just because we're in a bear market scenario or situation doesn't mean we should stop talking about plan giving. We should actually do it more often. It should be more part of what we're trying to accomplish, whether it's a blended perspective or individual opportunities. What we know is that we should always be talking about estate and planned and deferred giving. I would advocate one additional thing before I turn it back over to Jay, and we'll do some questions regarding what you need to know or how I can be helpful in this situation. I would highly, and I mentioned this on Tuesday, highly recommend that you spend more time in a bear market situation with your finance people than less. Sometimes in philanthropy, that's like asking someone to go get a root canal. Organizations are really in some tough situations right now. If we're in healthcare, we're watching the healthcare markets, and particularly hospitals, be in horrible financial shape. Education is not far behind in many cases. And I'm not talking about Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. They got plenty of endowment. I'm talking about, your average state school who's getting less and less state dollars to certainly smaller private schools. If we go into our social services, there was a great article in the Chronicle Philanthropy here recently that really they believe that the operational expenses, while we aim for this, idea of keeping them low, maybe it go as high as 33% with the inflation that we're facing and the costs involved with people and keeping front nonprofit employees. And I'm not talking about fundraisers. I'm talking about those who serve the mission part of what we do. The reason I say stay close to finances is that the more you're able to communicate how we do what we do and why we do, the more likely you are to have a very positive outcome in terms of the long-term relationship. As recent as yesterday, I've got a phone call from a client who indicated that their organization has made the decision without a lot of input from the philanthropy area that they were going to go to what I call a tax situation, that they were going to ask all gifts be taxed to cover the operational fundraising expenses of the philanthropy area. That's problematic because they've already announced a campaign. They've already announced a number. They have been in a situation where they have a very robust annuity program. How are you going to handle that? What about those estate plans and things that they've already closed or have knowledge of? And my response was, if it were me, at 7:30, I'd be sitting outside the CFO's office and say, why don't we talk about this? Because the implications of what you are thinking or wanting to do affect a lot more than you probably think. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Yes, we need to always be thinking about planned giving, even in a bear market. But I also would advocate we need to be better aligned with our finance offices. That allows us the opportunity to know the details of restrictions, changes, issues, challenges that our organizations are facing, particularly if you're the chief development officer. Don't run from them, run to them. They have information and it's helpful to us in philanthropy. Lastly, if I can be of help, here's some information on how to contact me. Certainly LinkedIn, I'm on that every day doing different things. You can do that as well. But really what I want to do and spend the last 10 minutes of is to hear from you. And I don't have the question, Jay, Q&A. I know you kind of oversee that, but I'd love to answer questions. I'd love to take some feedback, concerns, thoughts. Tell me what you're thinking, and I'm glad to be helpful. And I'm thankful, Jay, for you, for DonorSearch, and for the audience for the opportunity to kind of have a conversation about where planned giving fits today in this bear market.
Thank you so much, Randall. I know that people are appreciating this, and we can see it right there in the comments right now. Feel free to keep those comments coming because I know that he will appreciate this. And he's been back here before, and I hope he'll come back again. There's a lot to unpack, not just with these two issues this week, both of which are recorded in answer to Paula's question and will be posted over at the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net under the resources tab. You can see all the past, more recent recordings there. Often there's a link directly to YouTube, so all that can be shared with your colleagues, but also for the things that are coming on the road ahead. So that preparation will be really important now. Now, I know we have at least one question queued up here, but if anybody has any others, please do post it because I don't want to use up all the oxygen in the room. So go over to the question and answer tab, and if there's anything you want to know, please do use this opportunity to ask it. There are no bad questions in this stuff. And when you were talking, Randall, one thing that occurred to me is even when you were talking about term and whole life, these are things that people of a certain age know and maybe others don't. And in fact, even the whole topic of wills, I'm not sure if this number is true anymore, but I remember in the past, it was something like 75% of the US public did not have a will. So,
Correct.
you know, there are lots of questions that we all have, and there are definitely no dumb questions on this topic. So we'll start right now with Virginia's, where she says, on the topic of, we're on the cusp of launching a long-planned endowment campaign.
Oh, I love it.
Do you have any advice on how to make the case for endowment giving in this market?
Actually, I have the perfect case. It's today that the organizations having been through the pandemic, and let me turn off while I'm doing this, Jay.
Oh, sure.
Turn off the screen so unfortunately people can see me. That the chaos that we just experienced out of the pandemic, through the pandemic, and today are the absolute perfect justification as to why endowments are critical. What we know empirically is that the organizations that did the best to kind of stem change, massive change, negative change, were the ones who had a savings account. I also think sometimes we have to explain this to donors in a context of them. Do they have a savings account at home that they have for an emergency fund? And the answer is most hopefully do, our donors. In fact, we all should. And the reason why is because we don't know what's coming. Endowments are not only about building long-term strategy and engagement, whether it's a chair in academics or, you know, endowments for different positions or needs in healthcare or social services, but really what they are an insurance that our organization will be here doing the work that we do into the future. And if we didn't learn anything from the pandemic in this regard, then shame on us. It's the opportunity to over communicate to our donors. Look, this is why endowments are important. You want to know why Harvard and Yale, and those are kind of at the extreme, Princeton, Stanford, didn't have to make many changes? Because they got endowments. And that's what we need most organizations to try to find and have, whether it's museums or zoos or whatever else. Those with resources had the least problem through the pandemic.
Okay, I have to ask you a somewhat rhetorical question. So I know that Harvard and Princeton, Yale, all these places, they have a lot of alumni who've done pretty well. But what is the real reason why their endowments are so large?
Because they started this process asking about planned gifts about 200 or 300 years ago. There was a great article, Jay, it's a question, I'll use this example. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, but it might have been the New York Times. There is a satirist, writer, and he had a television show for a long time by the name of Ben Stein. And Ben Stein's Money, I think it was on MTV. I thought it was, I'm not a big MTV guy, but I thought the show was kind of a neat little game show he created. Ben Stein's Money. Wasn't it Jimmy Kimmel who hosted it? If I remember, was boy, you talk about the gray hair.
I think so, but actually what I would start to think of was, oh, shoot, the movie, Matthew Broderick. Help me, somebody.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yes.
Yes.
Bueller.
Same guy. Well, Ben Stein wrote a movie, or wrote an article, an editorial in the Wall Street Journal that said, Yale, for which he's an incredibly proud graduate, doesn't need my money. And he talked about this very fact that they started asking hundreds of years, 150, 200 years ago, anyone they could find who was a graduate and loved their experience, leave us in your estate. Leave us in your estate. They'd have class reunions, the 50-year reunion. And the goal is, if they still do it, everybody's going to make an estate gift. They put pressure on, they have it but it was delayed gratification. They didn't see the effect of it 50, 75, 80 years ago. They're seeing it today. And so the investment you make today is going to benefit your organization down the road. That's why they have them.
Yeah, absolutely. Carrie had asked, will there be a recording of this event? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes. So if you missed what I said a minute ago, and every time somebody does, so don't worry. Yes, we try to make recordings of all these sessions and place them over at donorsearch.net. You can find them under the resources tab. I think it's called Webcasts on Demand, but actually there's all the different areas of content we have in this non-commercial free series there, including these CFRE accredited programs. And that's something I did not talk about today. But if you're collecting credits towards your CFRE, which Randall Hallett has, then I hope that you'll collect yours for this session as well. And you'll see those sessions, again, recorded, posted, and also available on YouTube. Hannah had asked, does this mainly apply to nonprofits in the USA? And notes that she works in Bermuda.
No, I think it's a great question. Before I answer that question, I always believe in correcting myself. The Clark Howard stinks philosophy. Jennifer Hubert, yes, it was Comedy Central, not MTV. I'd like to thank you. You're 1,000% correct. Yes, this applies anywhere. People choose to make estate gifts less and less. People think it's for tax reasons. They don't make. Yes, they'll take the tax benefit. But that's not the reason people make charitable gifts. Right. If that were true, when the tax code changed in 2017 and the exemption became, I think it was 11.25 million to start, and now it's up to like 12.5 based on the CPI. Estate gifts would have dried up. Everyone would have said, because very few estates are more than 12 million for an individual, 25 for a couple. Estate giving's gone up twice. It's increased twice the rate as normal philanthropy in the last 10 years. So to your point in Bermuda, great question. It applies everywhere. If someone loves your organization, they buy into the mission and the output and the value that you deliver. And that's why you want to talk about an estate gift. Now, the tax laws are different, and how money passes might be different, but the passion is the same. Mm-hmm. Philanthropy is not about money. Philanthropy is love of mankind, and philanthropy is, if you really love human beings and the things that make a difference. This works in Africa, which is a different culture, and in the Far East, which is a different culture, and in Europe, and in the Soviet bloc, and in the United States, and in South America, and in Antarctica. Philanthropy is about how you help others. And yes, it works everywhere if you put it in the right context.
We have a question from Olivia about entry-level resources for learning about these and other financial tools. What's the best kind of on-ramp besides a session like this one?
It's interesting, Jay. There are some places you can go get exact, educational training. What I would advise is this. So let's take anybody who's a specific plan giving expert out of this conversation. Please don't leave, but you don't have to listen quite as closely. All you have to know are the basics. And there are so many free tools out there. If in my podcast, I'll use an example. I did a 4-part series, free, 20 minutes each, so 80 minutes, of the different instruments at a gift officer level. What is it you should be listening for? What does it mean? And what do these instruments actually do? High level knowledge. That's all you have to know. You have to know what the signals are. Then you have to know, how do I turn to someone who's an expert either on my board or inside the organization? So I would say, it's a bad answer, I apologize, but Google. You don't have to have a lot of money to learn. You have to have a lot of time, maybe not even that much time, a little impetus to get on the web and find free resources. I got 4 at my podcast, and if you reach out to me, I'll be glad to talk to you and answer any of your questions for nothing.
Great.
And I think there are a lot of us like that.
Just as a follow-up to that, we were kind of joking about the Ivies and so forth. But are there websites that you've seen, either clients that you've had, Randall, or others, where that kind of acts as a template? Not that we should just grab that stuff and put it on our websites, but maybe that introduces us to the ways that other organizations are successfully marketing the different ways that donors can give.
I think that I would start with, and it's not because I say they're better or worse, but because I'm more familiar. If you were to go to a website, there's stelter.com is kind of one of the bellwethers. I'm partial to Larry, who's now almost 80 years old, and it was started by his dad, I believe, and now Nick is the son is now in control. You can get an immense amount of free data there. I know crescendo.com has a lot of free stuff. Anybody's website who they advertise, the reason I'm saying to go there, they'll say these are clients. Go to those clients. They have standardized, great content that they just add on the backside of a website. Go look around and see. And charitable remainder calculators are everywhere, and you don't have to. You can learn so much just by looking around. And then if you're interested in that next step, like the National Plan Giving Council has a great series of seminars. Those are paid for. You can do those. There are conferences you can go to that specialize in it. There's some cost with that. If you want to do that, I advocate it, but I also know budgets are tight. So how do we find things that are more cost effective?
Right. And I guess as you've been saying throughout, or at least that's what I've been hearing, you don't have to wait to start making it possible for people to give in ways that are more beneficial to them, that are easier for them to do. So all of that makes a great deal of sense. Thank you so much, Randall. Really appreciate it. As always, really great information and very timely as well. I want to thank everybody for being here. And someone also mentions Russell James, who has been in this series. And in fact, if you go to my Twitter stream, you'll see that at Gordon J. Frost on Twitter, if you follow Twitter. Some people are still there. If you go there, you'll find that my post that's up at the very top of my stream has a link to the session that Randall did last fall. But he's done sessions in this series, and he's great. And
He's spectacular.
But I really appreciate you, obviously, Randall, for all that you've done, not just here, but generally throughout the field. You did tell people where they could find more information on you. Would you mind just at least giving us once again your URL or?
Sure. So Randall Hallett at LinkedIn is easy to find, and then it's Hallett Philanthropy. It's ballot like Hallett, except there's an extra T, HALLETT, philanthropy.com. Everything's right there, and if I can be helpful, I'm glad to do so.
Thank you again for that. And I do want to thank all of you for being here, but encourage you also to come back. Randall was kind enough to mention the book release of some people that we know mutually, really great people who have put a lot of heart and soul into a book that we think is an important discussion, and that's the generosity crisis. And so if you're not familiar with that subject or you don't know these people, I think you'll find that a really interesting discussion that we're going to have on Monday. That'll be live from New York. Yeah, I'll get a chance to say that. Live from New York with Randall and with Brian Crimmins. Not Randall, excuse me. I wish that were true. With Nathan Chappelle and Brian Crimmins. That'll be at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Right there in New York. I'll be talking with them and taking questions from you. So please join us for that. You can find that over once again at donorsearch.net, or you can find it in any of the places where I post on LinkedIn, Twitter, or on Facebook. So we hope we'll see you then. And until next time, take care of yourself, stay healthy. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Randall.